So, um, Greg, what is your favorite coffee?
I don't drink coffee, so zero coffee for me for about 7 or 8 years. So if I had to pick one, mine would be decaf coffee. Anything but
Uh,
coffee.
I guess as a true Englishman, you drink tea instead.
I drink tea. Yes, it's got to be Twinings, English breakfast tea. Yorkshire tea is popular around these parts because I live in Yorkshire, but I don't like it. So it's going to be Twinings English breakfast. I also like a fruit tea too. I realise this is terrible because your thing is called coffee and pens, but I
Yeah.
like pens. I like pens.
Oh, okay, awesome. That doesn't matter. Twinings, they even sell it over here in Peru. So why did you decide to write extreme production?
Oh God. Well, it's kind of a bit of a story because I wrote the book in 2017 and I didn't release it until 2020. I kind of released it before that, but I would never promoted it. I didn't have any kind of audience or anything. And I wrote it in 2017 because I was kind of figuring some things out about how to be more productive, and I thought I'd figured out a method that was worth sharing. And I wanted to write it purely as kind of a diary to myself, almost. A lot of the entries in it were actually blog posts or diaries and things like that. And what was quite interesting about the book is I wrote it in 2017 and then I didn't release it because I didn't think it was good enough. The same old story of imposter syndrome and all that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And then in 2020, I got sick of that and I thought, sod it, I'm going to release it. And I did. And some people enjoyed it and that was quite nice. So yeah, there wasn't a defined thing. It wasn't ever a goal of mine or anything. I still don't consider myself a writer.
Okay. Um, and then how long did it take to write this book? I read that you said it took about three times 1,000 words per week, so in a total of 25 weeks. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's about right, but that doesn't count in for the fact that I wrote the book twice.
Oh,
So
okay.
I wrote the book once. I didn't like it. So I went through the entire process of writing, 1,000 words, and I didn't like it. Scrapped the entire thing, and then
Okay.
wrote it again. And the reason I did that, maybe we'll get into it a little bit, is that I didn't think it had any personality. I just thought just was another production book. It was another self improvement book, and I didn't like that. So I binned it and started again.
Okay. Yeah, I did realize that it has a lot of personality now. It has a lot of view. It's got its unique style where you're not holding back to say anything that you want to say. That's what I felt. Um, so when did you start the second time? Was this in 2017 as well?
Yes, it was. It was one of the main projects that I had in 2017. One of the only ones, other than podcasting. I was podcasting at the same time as well. I was podcasting daily. And a lot of the kind of revelations for this idea of extreme production came from doing podcasting every day. And I was podcasting about it and then writing a chapter about it. And then sometime I'd write a chapter and then podcast. So they both fed off each other. It was really interesting. Um, I managed to wrap it up in 2017 and then literally did nothing with it at all.
Okay, that's funny. And then you just left it for 3 years, and last year you decided to publish it anyway.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah.
What what were your tools to write this book?
I I absolutely love Ulysses. So I use a thing on Mac called Ulysses, and it's just a Markdown editor. I love writing in Markdown because I used to be a web developer. I prefer things in as close to a plain text format as possible because now I spend most of my life as a designer. I like the fact that I can make it into as many different formats as I want. And one of the things I always wanted to do when I was writing it was release it as a real book, as an ebook, as an EPUB book, as a Mobi book, not just a PDF. I didn't just want the
Yeah.
PDF. So I made sure that I used Ulysses because it's got really good options for doing all those things. Another thing to say is that the most recent book I wrote, The Magic Visual, I used something called Vellum, which is probably something that Arvid Carl mentioned, because Arvid turned me onto it, and I actually think Vellum is a better product now, having written the latest book in that, but still, Ulysses is a solid option.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I've heard about Vellum before, and actually it was Andy Strode, one of my most recent interviewees, that mentioned it to me, and Arvid didn't. So Arvid mentioned to me that he used another Markdown editor. I think it's called Markdown itself.
Yeah.
So it's funny to see that people from a development or developer background love to write in these plain text formatting tools, and not like some super technological tool to write books like Scrivener, for example.
I tried. Is that how you say it? I've never known how to pronounce it. I tried Scrivener or Scrivener, or however the hell you say it. I tried it twice. I tried it with Extreme Production, and I tried it with Magic Visual, and I just got lost in all the options and how to set up my book, and all I was doing was organising the book instead of writing it. And that's what I really like about plain text files. No matter what app you use, you just sit down and write. There's nothing else to do. You can't mess around with the format and things like that. You've just got to write. And I think that's one of the problems sometimes with something like Scrivener. Unless you're writing a novel, you know, you've got to write scenes and plots and characters and all that kind of thing. I've only ever written non-fiction, so it's not really the same. But I do find Scrivener a good idea, because it was the format thing on the other end as well. Scrivener's got loads of different options for formats, outputting the formats, but it's just so damn complicated.
Yeah, I think you made a very good point there, that this is probably a very good tool for fiction, but then when you're writing non-fiction, you don't need all this organizing and story formats and character development and everything. So an easier tool like Ulysses that you used is something that I've noticed with other non-fiction writers as well. So apart from this, from finding this correct tool, what was your biggest obstacle to write your first book?
There was kind of two stages to it. There was, I had a huge, furious writing process. Like I said, writing 1,000 words nearly every day. And I stuck to that all the way through. So actually getting the words down on paper wasn't difficult. But then going back and editing it and deciding what I wasn't going to put in it and what was missing, or the gaps and things like that, I absolutely hate that process. And it was the first thing I'd ever written. I knew nothing about editing. I didn't know how to do it properly, all that kind of thing. So I just tried to do it all myself. And I just got lost in the middle of editing and drafting it and things like that. That's partly also why it took me so long, because I got to the end of the first draft. I never considered the idea of a shitty first draft. I just thought that I'd written the book, that was it. And I didn't like it. So my process essentially was to rewrite the book, which I guess was a second draft. But if I would have known about that a little bit earlier, to expect it to be fairly rubbish, maybe the process would have been quicker. So really there was two stages. There was the editing process, which I absolutely hated, and then actually finalizing the book. So after you've done all the editing, after you've done all the drafting, actually deciding what formats you were going to put it in, how you was going to release it, making the cover art, all that kind of thing. Even though I'm a designer, it was just wrapping up the project. I actually, some people might not agree with this, but I actually think writing the words, at least for my first book, was the easiest thing. Actually formatting the words and corralling them into some sense was the hard thing.
Okay, that's interesting. And then moving on to your second and third book, what did you do differently?
So the second thing I wrote, which was Press Start, which was a very short thing, was only about 100 pages. That was a visual and about 400 words, 300 to 400 words on every page. So it was super easy to write, and it was an experiment, really, how I could link my visuals to my words and vice versa. The third book was really the second one, which was the Magic Visual, which was a reference guide all about how to create visuals online and how, the theory and all that kind of thing. And on the third book, the one thing I didn't do with the first one was create an outline, because again, I didn't know what I was doing. The thing that I spent the longest time on with the Magic Visual was writing an outline, a really solid outline of all of the chapters, of all of the parts, and I spent a long time, probably a couple of months, working on that on and off to make sure that the structure of the book flowed. So because I did all that upfront work, I could actually see the book before I'd written any of the words without writing, without needing to write the entire book, which helped massively, helped a ton. And then the other thing I changed was using Vellum. So Vellum took all of the need for layout out of anything. It took all of the worry about outputting files out. It was just so easy to use. I dropped the text in. I even wrote a lot of the chapters inside Vellum. And then at the end of it, you just hit output and you've got the files. It's brilliant. I couldn't recommend it enough.
Okay, awesome. Did you at any stage decide to use an editor or proofreader?
No, I considered it. I considered it a lot for the Magic Visual. And I think whenever I decide what the next thing is that I'm going to write, I don't know what it's going to be, I think the project will be bigger and I will use an editor this time. By this time writing the third one, I generally knew a lot of the process. I could proofread it, and there's probably spelling mistakes in there, but I know there's not that many. But I think that the bit that I was missing was an editor to look over the structure of it, really. Not necessarily someone to look at the spelling mistakes and things like that, but a second pair of eyes. And I did a little bit of that with the Magic Visual because I released it as a beta book. A little bit like what Arvid did with his latest book, The Embedded Entrepreneur. And that was useful because some people told me what they didn't want and what they wanted. So I got some of that feedback, but I would hire an editor, I think, for the next one to help me with the structure of it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Now, rounding up these more technical questions about writing your book, I want to talk a little bit about inspiration and especially how you find inspiration and how do you think it's different for designing versus writing?
Yeah, it's strange with writing. So I like I said at the beginning, I don't see myself as a writer. I don't see myself as an author. I just see a medium and I communicate an idea in the most appropriate medium for the thing that I'm creating. So sometimes that is a visual, sometimes that's a podcast, sometimes a YouTube video, sometimes a book. So when I was thinking about the Magic Visual and trying to find inspiration for it, the thing that I had in my head was nobody has written a book about how the theory and the fundamentals of how to make visuals, how to design things that people notice online, basically. And I thought for a while, how am I going to structure it? And the inspiration for the kind of layout of the book ended up coming from, in fact, I've got the book here. Something a little bit like this. So this is The Intellectual Life.
Okay.
I don't know how to pronounce the author's name. It is Sertalanges, maybe. So the inspiration for that particular book came from this. I read a lot of old books. This is from 1946. And the structure of the book is very practical. It talks about how to live an intellectual life, how to become a writer, how to become a person of knowledge, basically. And the book is like super practical, like should you work at night? Should you work on a morning? How much sleep should you get? All that kind of thing. So I got inspiration for the book really from quite unusual places, and I do that for a lot of things. I did a thing recently on Twitter, a Twitter Spaces, where somebody asked me, where do you get your inspiration from? And I said, I just never read tweets. And they were quite surprised. And I think Twitter, if you take anything from this, I think Twitter is a poor source for inspiration because everybody is in an echo chamber saying the same things over and over and over. And if you're not careful, no matter what your next project is, be it a book or a course or whatever, you'll end up just making a thing that somebody else has already made because they're all consuming the same things over and over and saying the same things, reading the same threads. So my inspiration, I always try very hard to hunt in weird and unusual places. Old books is a good one for me. I spend way too much money on old books. Both visual books and actual book books.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I agree about Twitter. I found Twitter so interesting in the first 2-3 months. And then you start to realize that, as you said, what you read is something that someone has already said 2 months ago, 3 months ago, last year. And it becomes very hard to actually find new inspiration, like you said. And very interestingly, your point about when you write a book on and you find a lot of inspiration on Twitter, you're going to write something that has already been said. I have never thought about it that way, but I think you're right about it. Now, talking about your current writing habits, how much do you write per day around now?
Well, I write around 10 tweets per day. So if you count tweets,
Of course, everything counts.
Yeah, so I tend to write 380 times 10, whatever that is, 3,800 characters. I tend to write tweets, but I don't really consider that proper writing because it uses a very different part of your brain. I write twice a week on my newsletter on a Monday and a Friday, and they're usually about 1,000 words. So really, at the minute, I'm not writing that much. For a long time, this is why I don't consider myself to be a writer. Unless I want to write a book or something long form, I really struggle to maintain a strict schedule for writing regularly. And I'd love to do it, and I don't know what it is. I don't know what the blocker is in my head, but I prefer the structure of writing something a little bit bigger once or twice a week that just keeps it top of mind, rather than writing a little bit every day. And I don't know why that is. But yeah, I write twice a week at the minute, and I don't really write that much.
Okay. So you write about 1,000 words twice a week, which is 2,000 words, which is still going to be a lot more than the average person.
Yeah, maybe.
And I completely forgot what I was going to ask about it. I'm sorry.
It's my rambling answers. It's my fault.
So yeah, I was going to ask, how much time do you spend on those 1,000 words?
I have quite an unusual way of writing, and many people, writers better than me, are probably not going to agree with me. But when I write anything, including a book, I write it in kind of one sitting. So I'll write a chapter in one sitting, or I'll write a thing in one sitting, and I very rarely go back and edit it in terms of structure, in terms of adding a new intro or adding a different ending or changing the middle or anything like that. Because I kind of get this burst of inspiration, and I feel like when I get the burst of inspiration, as soon as you've not got that inspiration anymore, the spark out of the thing that you're writing's lost somehow. I'm very careful to only write something when I'm quite inspired to talk about it, because I think you can just tell. You can just tell in somebody's writing when they've got conviction, and when they've got a spark, and when they've got something that needs to be said, like they feel they need to say it, versus a James Clear article that is very well researched but is dull as ditch water, and it's just teaching you something. I talk about it being content for aliens, writing for aliens. It all feels so impersonal. There's no personality behind it. There's no sense that James Clear has written it. It could be anybody. So I'm always very careful when I write something that I sit down in one sitting in like a mad spree of just bashing a keyboard and then done, finished. I don't care if the structure's not perfect, but that for me, there's a quotation that I read a while ago. I can't remember who said it, and the quotation is, "Writing is frozen speech." And I always like to think of writing like that, that when you read something that I've written, or that hopefully when you read something that somebody else has written, a classic thing, you can kind of imagine them saying it to you. And I think you lose a bit of that if you sit and edit something over and over and over. So I kind of sit down and literally speak an article to myself through my fingers and then just stop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's important that you say this. I'm on the same spectrum as a writer. So when I write, I can go over one sentence maybe 5-6 times while I'm writing, but in the same sitting, like you said. And it's hard for me to come back to something in the end and start editing it, because I prefer to edit while I write.
Yeah,
and
same.
Many people will tell you off, will say, no, that's not the way to write. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that aspiring authors realize that it's not entirely wrong, that it's just your own system that needs to work and not what other people tell you that you should do.
Yeah, absolutely. You've always got to be careful about reading writing tips, I think, because I think writing is thinking, and there isn't a right or wrong way to think about something. So if you are the kind of person that sits down and thinks about something intensely for 30 to 60 minutes and then just writes it, then you do you. But a lot of those kind of articles that you read that say that's not the right way, they're writers that's writing about writing that's never written about anything else but writing. So the authority for me is nothing. If you're reading something, unless you're reading a classic, like Stephen King on writing or something like that, maybe I'd appreciate his opinions on it. But you've got to be careful about who you read those kind of opinions from, because if you're not, you're just reading somebody's opinions about writing on writing, which I've usually discount, especially if it's a Twitter thread. I'll definitely discount a Twitter thread.
Okay, so it's a surprise you actually follow me on Twitter. But anyway, I do. You made a good point about following people's writing advice, and I'm going to ask you for yours in just a little bit as well. But those opinions, I think they can be quite useful, but you always need to be a bit critical about them. I can find interesting ideas from other people's writing advice, but I still need to figure out if that's going to work for me or not. So I can't just take that advice blindly and implement it in my life, but I can definitely find ideas that will work for me that I could not think of by myself. So having said this, what would be your top 3 writing tips for someone who's listening or reading?
Oh, God. I'll caveat it by saying exactly the thing I just said. My opinion means nothing, and you need to try out these ideas and see if they work for you. The first thing, there's a collection of writing by Schopenhauer, however you say it, and he's got a section in his collected writings on writing. It's brilliant. It's pretty short, but it's brilliant. So check that out. Number 2. What's been quite powerful for me is writing how I speak. Another thing that a lot of writers will tell you not to do, but I write how I speak. So I literally try and speak the article as I'm writing it. I don't mean literally, actually. I shouldn't say that. But yeah. I'm thinking the article as I'm writing it. So I see an article as I'm giving a speech to a room of people. So speak the article as you write it. And then number 3, I don't know if I have a third one. Have a strong ending.
Okay.
And that's a weird tip, actually. The reason I say that is because even though I don't call myself a writer, one of the first creative acts I ever did on the internet, which was about probably 15 years ago now, longer, was writing for video game magazines. I used to love reading video game reviews in magazines, because they've just got a really cool style to them, because there's lots of personality. They write how they speak. And the other thing that I picked up from it is they always had strong endings, even though they were reviews of video games, which is utterly dull. They always had a strong ending. And when you look at any good piece of work, they always really the only thing you remember is the last bit. You only remember the last sentence, the last paragraph, the crescendo that comes towards the end, the surprising twist. So, yeah, even though mine's a long rambling ending, have a strong ending.
Okay, perfect. Can you remind or remember any of those strong endings? right now? Any ideas or any examples?
One thing I like to do is to take creative ideas from other mediums that isn't writing. And the thing that instantly springs to mind, even though the film is fairly average, Inception. I'm thinking of Inception. I'm going to spoil the ending if you've never seen it, so sorry. But the whole idea of the film is he has this little spin top that he spins around to know whether he's inside a dream, basically. And at the very end of the film, he spins the spin top around, and if the spin top falls over, it means that he's in the real world. If the spin top stays spinning, it means he's in a dream world. So he spins the spin top, and the camera's focused on it, and it goes 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and it's still spinning. And it gets to about 5 seconds, and you go, right, it's going to fall over now. And the screen goes black. End. You never find out whether it falls over or it keeps spinning. And when I went to the cinema to see that, everybody in the audience just went, oh, because you don't know. You don't know what happens. And I absolutely loved that ending, because there's a feeling a lot of the time when you're writing stories, or even when you're writing non-fiction, that the ending has to be neatly packaged up, that you have to somehow close everything out. There's got to be a resolution, because that's what humans like. But some of the most powerful endings I can think of, and that stuck with me, even though, like I said, the film's fairly average, is the ones where you don't find out the solution, because now you've got an open loop inside your brain where you want to find out the solution, but you can never find it out because you've never been given it. I think those kind of endings are really powerful.
Yeah, you're right. I think that's why I like short stories. They tend to have these open endings where you never really find out. And it's not something natural in nonfiction, as you said, but it might be something interesting to explore.
Yeah. And the other thing as well, it's not really an ending, but just on that point that you mentioned, is when nonfiction takes the ideas of short stories, or takes the ideas of storytelling. So it isn't just a normal book. It's just not a normal nonfiction book where it's telling you something and you're learning something. The one that I think of off the top of my head is the E-Myth. That's the E-Myth. It's a really old book. And it's about how to structure a business, essentially. Huge bestseller, sold millions of copies. The book's actually a story. It's written like a story, whereas you never see that style most of the time in nonfiction. And it's written like a story. And another one that I'm reading right now is Luke Burgess's book, Wanting. That is also got full of stories, basically, full of short stories. And it just makes it more engaging, even though it's a nonfiction book.
Yeah, I think those two of the first books I read, Jamie Russo's book, of course, that you've probably read as well, also has this storytelling inside his nonfiction book, and that's pretty cool. And then someone who I find did it even better was Corey McComb, who wrote Productivity is for Robots.
Yes, I've read that.
And I absolutely love his writing style.
He's so poetic. He's brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. And that is, I think, the perfect example of a nonfiction book that's full of storytelling and like engaging stories, relatable stories, things that motivate you, that make you think.
And I think what's really cool as well about Corey's book is that there is a attention to detail to individual sentences and words, almost like poetry, that you never see in nonfiction. In fact, you don't even see it in a lot of stories, to be perfectly honest. There is a poetry level of word picking in his book that you just don't see very often.
Exactly. He's a real artist when it comes to words. Changing the topic a little bit, since your first book was about productivity, what productivity advice would you have for aspiring authors?
The thing I always say is set a schedule, write daily, even though I don't write daily. Do something daily. So to give you context, I do lots of things daily. I write tweets daily. I make visuals daily. I used to podcast daily. So any skill that I want to improve, I do it daily for as long as possible. So I did used to blog daily for a while to improve my writing. So I think it's a very powerful model. Atomic Habits is apparently a good book about this, although I've never read it. It's a very powerful model because you can just do 100 words a day, 200 words a day, and you just automatically improve. Doesn't matter what you write. You don't need to be writing a novel or anything. You can just, I don't know, even sit down and write a journal. When I first started writing journaling, I found it had quite a profound effect on the way I wrote quite quickly, which really surprised me. So the obvious productivity advice is to do the thing you want to get better at. And I know it's not sexy. It's not going to make anybody leap up and down. But I've proven it for 15 years that you can improve at something by just doing it every day. But it's hard.
Okay. It's funny that you mentioned journaling, because that's exactly what I wanted to ask next. Do you still journal write daily?
I do actually. I must admit I fell off the habit for a while. During the pandemic, I barely wrote anything in a journal. Don't know why that was. I don't think it's related to the pandemic. I just fell off the bandwagon, so to speak. And now I decided to start writing, as in writing on paper, proper writing. Mm-hmm. So I actually just write in a journal now, in an actual diary. And one thing that I've tried to do is, instead of trying to capture the whole day, instead of trying to, recollect everything that happened. So got up at 7 a.m., was grumpy, that kind of thing. I decided to almost sketch an idea out now. So what I do is I think back on the day and I try to write something about something that's happened on the day, but focus on the detail instead of trying to capture the entire day, which was largely dull and boring. I try and pick one thing out that was interesting and write a little, 50 words, 100 words or something about that. It makes it so much more enjoyable for me.
I think I had a similar approach to journaling, and just like you, when the pandemic started, or maybe like a few months in, I stopped doing it. And I'm wondering, maybe it's just because our lives got boring is not the right word, but less engaging. Like, you're not leaving the house as much, so there's not as much to talk about. Like, every day is the same. You're working on the same projects, and even though you're going forward, even though new things are happening, you already process them because that's the only thing you think about, and maybe there's no need to journal about it.
Yeah, I was actually going to say exactly the same thing. I barely left my house, so nothing was really happening. Whereas the thing I wrote yesterday, it was about meeting a guy. I went for a meeting with somebody at work, and he was just a really surprising character. And that was the thing that I wrote about. Yeah. That's not happened for the last year and a half. So, I think it probably is related to that, to getting outside and viewing things again. I think one way I like to look at it is kind of sketching something with words rather than actually drawing something.
How important do you think that journaling is, and even having those conversations for writing and even designing as well?
I've gone through stages where I have journaled every day for years. I've gone through stages where I've not done it for years as well. And I could honestly say that I didn't feel like a lesser person when I'd done either or, essentially. I don't think there's much value, for me personally, this is only my opinion, I don't think there's much value in reminding yourself about what happened on your day. We've got enough touch points now. We've got the photos in our phone that we take. We've got the tweets we've written, all those kind of things. I think we've got enough touch points, digital touch points, that we don't need to just write the dull stuff. What I have found useful in journaling is whenever I've gotten creative with it, whenever I've decided to sit down and actually write something that nobody will ever see, but I actually write a little bit of a story about something that actually happened. I actually sit down and see it as a creative act rather than a reporting act, really. I've found a lot of value in that. I haven't found much value in just writing about the day, honestly. And even to the extent where I used to use Day One to do this. So there's an app on Mac. I think it's on Android as well now, called Day One. And I used to sit down and write a journal entry, and it pulls in the weather, it pulls in your photos, it pulls in your Instagram photos if you want it to, your tweets. And I'm like sat there staring at it thinking, this is my day. This is what happened. I don't need to write anything else. So what am I going to write? So yeah, journaling's a weird one. I think if you are wanting to improve as a writer, you're better off spending the time you would journal to write something creative, even if that's only 100 words. Because, time is limited for most people, especially creative energy is limited. So any extra pointless writing that you're doing is going to sap that.
Yeah. I've found the same with journaling. The only use I get from it is when I actually write down physical or health-related things. So when I say, for example, this day I had a toothache, for example, but this day I felt some pain there. And then when I look back in my journal, I can kind of figure out a consistency or see like, okay, this happened to me 3 weeks ago, and then maybe try to find like touch points and say, okay, this is maybe because of this that happened. But otherwise, I'd never look back at my journals. Do you look back at your pages in your journal, or do you just use it as daily exercise?
One thing I've changed, which answers your point, I now use a traveler's notebook, which has got 2 notebooks attached together inside it. In one notebook, I actually write my tweets down. So before I tweet them, I write them down, which somehow makes me write more insightful things that don't feel as throwaway as a tweet probably does. And then the other thing that I do is write the little entry that I said, like a sketch with words. I do look back at it now because I'm actually writing quite interesting things.
Okay.
Before, so even in the journal that I've got right here on the desk, even a couple of months ago, I wasn't doing this. They was just the boring entries. I've never been back to those. Why would I read those? In fact, let's have a look. What do they say? The very beginning. Let's have a look. Had an unproductive meeting. Cool. So why am I ever going to go back to read that? It's just nonsense. It's just pointless writing. The only things I go back and read is the insights, and I think that's truly the value of it, isn't it? You're writing your insights down, so you can either go back to them and review them later, or turn them into something else.
All right. It's about time to round up. Those were most of my questions, and I thank you for your insightful information answers so far. I always like your a little bit, sometimes contrarian stance on Twitter, where you try to go against the mainstream and everything. So thank you again, and let's finish off with my last and favorite question. What's your secret?
My secret is that I reveal it every day on Twitter. It's doing something daily, man. Doing something daily, creating every day, create something for you. And I'm going to add a bonus secret, just one more thing. Create for you and don't make it for anybody else. No audience, nobody else, make it for you. That's it.
What do you mean by this? Like not publish it? Or
no, you can
just create it for yourself and then publish it no matter what they say?
Publish it if you feel comfortable. I aggressively publish nearly everything, but I know that's not for everybody. But even when you publish something, make it for you first and not any idea of an audience. Don't worry about the audience you're going to build. Just make it because you want to make it, because I honestly believe that when you look at creations or art or whatever word you want to use, you make the best stuff when you make it because you want to make it, because you've got the enthusiasm for it. There's a zeal to it. That there's a passion to make it. Whenever you make it for other people, whenever you make it for an audience, whenever you make it because you feel like you have to, it's always worse. So yeah, make it for you.
All right, thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to share before I close up?
Don't think so. an apology. I've got a cold, so I'm probably quite difficult to understand. I've got a cold and the weather's really hot in the UK, so it's quite surprising. But other than that, no, it's been lovely. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you. All right, I stopped the recording here. It's just